Hey, hi, and welcome. Alright, let's just jump into this. Okay, so I'm trying to come up with different ideas for different videos, something off the regular beaten path that I normally do, so that I can post them on my YouTube and my BitChute. So for those of you who don't know, I have if you want my political stuff, it's pretty much over on BitChute. You can't really get away with that on YouTube anymore, and I'll never make YouTube really a political channel anymore because it just the rules change so much, and I've already had one channel of many years. Was it 14 years? Well, 2007 to 2019 or something like that. Whenever that channel, my Not Reg Me channel, got banned. So I just want to stay within the guidelines. So this one, I figured there should be nothing controversial about it, but you never know, right? But I'm going to try it anyway. And what I want to talk about is and I did a video on this subject before, but without getting into the politics of what's going on in the world and the really harsh economy that the globe is going through. It's not just one country, it's all countries. People are scrambling around to invest in things. Now, first off, I am not an investor, okay? I am a guy, and to give you an idea, you're taking advice from a guy who has 3 broken trucks, okay? One barely keep it running, okay? They all need parts and they're all full of rust. With one dead Honda CRV with 400,000, almost 500,000 kilometers on it. And a broken Triumph motorcycle. Cool motorcycle, but a broken Triumph motorcycle, and a computer that sounds like a nuclear reactor now. So, in other words, I'm broke. Right? So you're taking advice from a gambler, basically. So if you follow any of this advice, it'll get you where it's going to get you, right? But I talked about investment motorcycles before, and why they might actually be a great idea right now. Okay, number one, there's a part shortage. Means if you got a running motorcycle of a vintage type or really sought after, one huge advantage you get is that if that thing is still running, when you can no longer get parts for it, it just became unobtainium. Meaning you don't even start it. You're gonna look at this thing. You're gonna take the baby's crib, okay, and put it over into the corner somewhere, and you're gonna put the bike there instead. Why? Because the baby, they'll adapt, right? But the bike is going to be his retirement. It's going to be his grandkids' retirement. Because again, the more rare things become, the more expensive they get, right? And expensive is definitely, of course, if you're as broke as I am, you have to invest smart. So a lot of people are investing in different things. So what you get into, like the stock market, for example. Well, I'll keep it really short. Anybody that disagrees with this is just dishonest. The stock market is rigged. It doesn't matter if we're talking the Toronto Stock Exchange here in Canada, or Wall Street in the States. They're all rigged beyond belief, and you can lose everything. And in 2008, people lost everything. I lost probably about 20 grand in retirement savings, because I couldn't touch the savings anyway. They were locked in. Over 7.5 years that I worked at this one company, they had a retirement savings plan that you could touch, and then there's another half of it you can't touch it till you're 65 or whatever. And you just can't pull it out. So you can only sit there and watch it. It's kind of like, picture exploding darts being fired at a glass vase. It's kind of like that. Is it going to hit? Is it not? Right? That's what your retirement. That's what my retirement is like. So I don't even look at it, because I'm like, it's not going to be there when I'm there. The bankers keep ripping everybody off, right? So they did it in 2008. Now the biggest transfer of human wealth in human history is even bigger than in 2008. Every billionaire on the planet, or the top Fortune 500 people that we know about, is their wealth has went up 100 times, 150 times. It's an unfathomable amount of wealth that is being ripped away from the middle class, right? So what are you to do if you don't want to be starving in the streets? Well, you got to invest in something and ride that wave up. You got to protect yourself. So stock market, if you don't know how it's rigged, you're just going to lose everything. There are some people that kind of know how it's rigged and they can make money on that. So that's kind of one of those things that you don't just jump into the stock market. You have to know what you're doing. It's stock market really is mostly too complicated for the average guy. I've been kind of following the stuff for years, and I know enough to be dangerous, but even at that, it's like, okay, I don't know enough how to invest and actually make money. You know what I mean? Like long term, I don't know how I'd make money on it. But there are people that do it. So if you can do that, great. But if you don't know how to do that, you might want to search after something else. The next big thing craze seems to be going on right now is basically art. Now, art I've always thought of as like that's how the mob launders money is get like these little art factories that are basically people that get paid to produce like this postmodern art, and then some guy sells it from one guy to the like they pay the guy very little. They pay him well enough to keep him working, but they don't pay him very much, right? They don't pay the artist very much. But they turn out like so much art, and then they just start selling it to their buddies for 100,000, 500,000. Basically, it's how you launder the money, right? Because the painting, like there's like dollar store supplies are making these paintings, right? So you can see it's a scam. So that'll work for like the upper classes, but again, the common person, not so much. Jewelry, a lot of people seem to be investing in jewelry. Has always been a good investment to a degree, but like gold and silver, it kind of just sits there, and it's like you have to have a pretty spectacular piece in order to like upsell it. You know what I mean? So what you might pay for something, like if you went and bought a brand new diamond ring, it depreciates right away. You may have to hold on to it for 50 years to even get back to its original value, right? So unless it's something that's really rare, and it's going to be hard to wait like 5-10 years for it to double in price or quadruple or go up 100 times, right? So that's a gamble, but it is a lot of people are doing it. But again, you got to kind of know, you got to kind of be into that. It's like collecting coins or anything like that, like rare coins. Coins are great if you know the value of them, and it's not what something is worth to buy. And this is something when I used to work in a motorcycle shop years ago. My boss always said it's not what something is worth to buy, it's what is it worth to sell, right? So you get an old GS 1100 coming in and you buy it for $400, you're going to turn around and sell it for, well, at the time you would have probably sold it for like $600 to $700, maybe $800 if it was on the low end, and maybe like $1,100-$1,200 on the high end. But it was a bike that absolutely nobody wanted. Why? They were fugly, right? So GS 850, GS 1100, those old 70s, 80s bikes, early 80s, late 70s bikes, only the extreme enthusiast will buy those bikes, and if you have one all original, maybe you'll get maybe $3,000 for it. So cars, obviously flipping cars. Problem with cars is cars are huge. I mean, I got 3 trucks, right? And they're big. So for the space of one truck, you could fit about 5 bikes there. So just keep that in mind. There's the holy grail bike right there, the 916. We're going to be talking about the 916 in this video. Okay, so let's fast forward to the motorcycle part. So motorcycles as investments. Well, the rule of thumb is if people didn't want it when it came out, like they're not going to want it later, right? Like if they don't want it now, they're not going to want it later. So you have to look at bikes that made a statement. These Yamaha R1s. A 1998 Yamaha R1 is almost impossible to find in good condition for a reasonable price. They're going up in value. Give you an idea. When they came out, these Yamaha R1s and R6s and stuff like that, they were a step forward in technology. All the super bikes we see right now are basically based off the formula of that R1, which took bikes that were fat, big. They were big and powerful, but fat and kind of clumsy, even though they were, still pretty nimble for sport bikes. Like sport bikes are nimble, and just turned like, made a 1,000cc bike handle like a 400cc bike, but with brute power. The Yamaha 1998 Yamaha R1, people that do have them, they don't get rid of them because they know what they are. Now I think brand new, they went out the door under 10 grand, 8-10 grand. I remember seeing them in 1998. I remember sitting on them in the showroom floor. I was more of a Harley guy back then, so I didn't really pay attention to what they what they were, but I knew they were something spectacular because I loved the look of them. Even though I was a cruiser guy and I wasn't into the sport bikes back then, I'm like that thing's gonna stay timeless, and they're still a great looking bike, as you can see, right? Yeah, that's the R6, but you know the R1, you know, they had, you know, they had a really nice style to them. And of course, they were also widowmakers. You know, I refer to the 1990 Yamaha R1 as like the two-wheeled version of the Dodge Viper at the time. Like, it was always trying to kill you. Never had the pleasure of riding one, but like anything, it was a track bike that was road legal. So of course, everybody wanted one, right? And these were the type of bikes that people would want. You know, to run the piss out of, and they bought them because they were cheap enough, right? And not only that, they were just like superior to just about anything else on the road performance-wise. These were fast bikes, you know, they were 175-mile-an-hour bikes, you know, even by today's standard. Like, you get over that 150 mile per hour mark, trust me, the world moves by very fast. Don't ask me how I know, I just know. Um, so anyway, yeah, a bike like that, it lost a lot of value as soon as it went off the lot. And then of course at one point you used to pick these bikes up, I'd say for a really rough one, you might, that needed all kinds of work, maybe 500 bucks. But they hovered between, like, say, $1,500 and $2,000 for an okay one, right? And now they're kind of creeping up between like 3, 4, 5,000, 6,000 on the high side if you can find them. Problem is, you can find a 99 and up, no problem, for around 2,500 to 3,000, 4,000 bucks. Probably going to need work. One that doesn't need any work is probably going to be, of course, it's probably going to be a lot worth a lot more. You know, like and especially if it's the anniversary models or the, you know, like I forget the victory model or whatever they call. Those things are like $5, $6, $7,000. You know what I mean? Just because they're more rare. So you'd say a Japanese bike, nobody would ever predict that these Japanese bikes would be worth almost half to two-thirds their you know, basically sticker price, right? Now let's talk about the 916, because this is a bike that I remember. 1994 was a good year. 1992, 3, and 4 were really good years in my life. I don't know why. I just look back on those years so fondly. I was really heavy into bikes. Working in the bike shop, you know, I was working too much, but I was working like 3 jobs at the same time, and this was in the recession in the 90s. You know, in comparison to now, those were the good old days. So anyway, I'm in the shop one day, and somebody started talking about this new bike. It was an Italian bike made by Ducati, and it was, and I kind of, in one ear out the other, didn't think much of it. And the guy was just saying, "You got to see this thing; it's incredible." And so anyway, I didn't think much of it, and I used to tour around and talk to guys at other bike shops. You know, I worked at it was called Ottawa Cycle Parts. I worked there, and then I go up the street and talk to the Harley guys at Hearst Harley Davidson, because I was into Harleys really. And I had a Harley. I had a 1948 Harley Davidson Panhead, which in hindsight I probably shouldn't have sold it. You know, but anyway, I've told that story on that bike quite a bit, so I'll just you know, I'll just leave that one at that one. So anyway, one day I decided to go, because I was always a motorcycle enthusiast first. Okay, I never really, like, I was always like wanted the Harleys, because that was like a holy grail bike. You know, it was a status symbol to have one of those, right? And I still respect the motorcycle, because, you know, the company's been around a long time. Yeah, I know the politics, whatever. You know, every year, oh, these are the worst Harleys. What decisions are they making? And then, like, when the Evo came out in 1985, oh my God, that's it for Harley Davidson. Those are ugly bikes. Blah blah blah. It's one of the best engines Harley Davidson ever built. You say, well, that's not true. Harleys aren't reliable. There's still Evo engines out there with 100,000 miles or more on them, still running tickety boo. There are Evo engines on the first rebuild over 1.5 million miles on them. 1.5 million. So if that is not a testament to good engineering, it's farm tractor engineering, but it's good engineering. I don't know what to tell you. There's probably no shovelhead that's ever went 1.5 million miles. Yeah, I saw it. Was a, I think it was a Road King or a Road Glide. It was an older Road Glide. It was an Evo. So they stopped making the Evo in the early 2000s, and they went to the CVO and all that stuff. And now they got the Milwaukee 8, and God knows what else they're going to come up with. Uh, but the point I'm making is Harley Davidson made a darn good bike. They just run and run and run and run. What messes them up are the custom bikes. The people that overcarb it, put straight pipes on it, and start putting all the Jesse James, all these bike build stuff. That's what puts the Harleys on the side of the roads. If you leave your Harley stock, it'll probably run forever. Uh, you know, they're not super high compression engines. They just keep running. You know what I mean? They're a lot higher compression now, but you know, like the old carbureted bikes still run fine. So anyway, I'll get into the 916. So I go over, and it's where I bought my Triumph, it's the Auto Good Time Center, and that place this is back in the 90s when it used to be on Bank Street. That they've moved that shop like about 10 times, and they keep getting bigger and bigger, right? So I walk into the store, and the first thing I seen, and I already seen some magazines of a bike that I wanted just to see it, and it was the Triumph Daytona 955i, or sorry, the 955. Sorry, the 959. Yeah, that one. Uh, uh, yeah, and I went and I seen it, and I got on it. I remember I was like, wow, this is cool. Like like that was like, okay, that is the dream bike right there. Uh, or yeah, the 595. I'll get it right. Anyway, which is a 955 engine, and right beside it was this brilliant red bike. It was skinny and it was really tall, and it said Ducati 916 on it. And I looked at it and I just, okay, that's kind of interesting. So I remember getting off the Triumph saying, man, this bike is really super tall. And I was actually kind of scared of it in the showroom, because when I picked it up, it was just like, okay, I'm used to like a cruiser where you can flat foot the thing. Now on a sport bike, I'm not going to get into the details of it, but you basically you 1 foot them. That's how you get the ground clearance, so you can corner really well, is that they have to be high, right? So it's like, oh man, this bike's sketchy. So I'm on my tippy toes. So back then I just didn't know that, once you went on 1 foot, it wasn't so bad. But even at that, it was still a tall bike. So I get off the 595 Daytona, and I was like, that's my favorite sport bike. Even if I was ever to ride a sport bike, like I said, I wasn't into sport bikes back then, but if I was ever to ride one, that would be it. And that bike, I think, was over 10 grand Canadian. So I go and I get on this Italian stallion of a 916, and I picked it up, and I sat on it, and I'm like, and now mind you, this is in a showroom, it's not the best lighting, but I was like, I wasn't that impressed. I didn't think anything of it. It's like kind of a nice looking bike, but it was really skinny, like really skinny, and I picked it up, and I didn't think anything of it. I was like, okay, well, same thing. It's, really high, and, this thing would be kind of sketched to ride, and I'm sure it's fast as hell and you'll die. And then I put it down, and then eventually I sat on an R1, and same thing with the R1. It's like, okay, yeah. But the R1 was like half the price of the Ducati. I can't remember what the Ducati was at. It was a little over 10,000, I think, or it was around that mark. We'll say between 10 and 14,000, whatever it was. It was really high. So I was very impressed with it. I put, with like the frame. I remember looking at the frame and thinking, that's pretty cool. So then I didn't think much of it, and I walked out of the shop. And a couple of weeks later, I was downtown, and in Ottawa at the time, before all the sissies took over, we used to have in the Bywood Market a cruise night kind of thing, where almost every night, every throughout the summer, anywhere between 1 and 500 motorcycles could be at the market at any time, of every make and model. And it was a sunny day, and I just got off my bike, and I parked it, and I was talking to some friends and whatever. I was walking along, and there it was in the sunshine, this brilliant red Ducati 916, 1994. And I remember looking at it. It was kind of like looking at a dream woman. Like my head was like rubbernecking as I was walking by it. And I stopped, and my buddy and I stopped, and we were like, that is the most gorgeous motorcycle sport bike we've ever seen. And we both said it like simultaneously, like in a daze at the same time. We were just memorized by this. And he's like, Reg, that is the most, Yeah, I say I know it's like the most beautiful motorcycle we've ever, sport bike we ever seen. And again, not into the sport bikes. And then some guy came along and he sat on the bike, kind of gave us a dirty look, like, fuck off, don't touch my bike. You know what I mean? And that was common too. But it was just like I waited till he started up, and it was like, oh wow, cool sound. Like like the thumper sound. I didn't realize they were a twin, right? The L twin at the time. But then, that was 1994, so the legend hadn't been hyped up yet. Like this thing is just okay. It's a Ducati. Like, well, listen, I said it sounds great, but we'll see if he can make it around the corner without breaking down. It's a Ducati, right? He did. He did. He made it around the corner. He didn't break down. Yeah, yeah. Yeah. He made it around the corner. So you don't think anything of these bikes, right? And the 748 was the same. So the reason I go on this story is that it comes back to the first rule. If you didn't want it back then, or whatever's out now, whatever you want now, that's what people are going to want in the future. Whatever you don't want, you know, people are not going to be looking for it in the future, right? So this comes to the investment. So you can find a lot of cheap bikes, like, and people will do this. They'll buy a cheap bike now, like say a Honda CBR 900. Okay, cool bike, because you can pick them up in good condition, still running, pretty much all original, um, for like 1,500 bucks, right? And these are like early 2000s bikes. Okay, no problem. But if it was say a Honda CBR 926, I think is the engine, uh, that one's a little more sought after. So that thing might be 50 years before it even goes up in value. Like there'd have to be almost none of them left on the planet. Now here's the thing about the R1, 1998 R1, or R1s in particular. They're still making them, but whenever they stop making them, their days are numbered. The same way the days are numbered on the 916s and the 748s and the 996s, is because people love these bikes, right? They like to look at them, sure, but they also like to ride them. And these bikes, particularly the R1 comes to mind here, is the R1 is probably the king of the ground loop. Meaning you get a lot of newbies, like R1s were almost impossible to insure for a guy under 25 in my area. Almost impossible. Um, I remember one day I was riding along on my panhead chopper, and this kid pulled up beside me on a Kawasaki 636. Brand new Ninja 636. They just came out that year or the year before, I can't remember. Anyway, kid's like, I'm 18. My folks just bought this for me for my birthday. I'm like, oh, great, a yuppie. I said, this kid's dead. Now, we went from like first light, then to the second light. We came stopped, and when the light turned green again, when he took off, he kind of popped the clutch and rammed the car ahead of him. Lady looked in the mirror. He's like, "Oops, sorry," that kind of thing. He didn't do any damage. I'm like, "Yeah, this kid's gonna raise my insurance. He's gonna die and raise my insurance." Right? But a Kawasaki 636, same thing. Everybody wanted them back then to beat them up because they were cheap, and I remember sitting on those too. And, they're one of those bikes that were kind of sought after. But then there was these bizarre looking machines called S-Rads. These were Suzuki GSXRs, and I had only ever ridden one of them, S-Rad, and I can't remember if it was a 600 or a 750. I believe it was a 750, and I just remember how nuts the thing was. I'm just like, I'm gonna die on this thing. It was fun, but and I had tried all kinds. I tried RDs. I probably have ridden probably about 100 different motorcycles or more. I got to try them in the shops and stuff like. We'd fix them up and then take them out for a test drive, make sure they were safe to bring back to the customer, or just to figure out what was wrong with it, for the customer and stuff like that. Now, mind you, I never abused customer bikes or anything like that, but like sometimes I'd take them on errands, like for the shop, say, okay, we got this bike for the shop, we're going to be selling it, take it out, tell me if you notice anything wacky on it before we sell it, you know what I mean? And I got to do that, so that was cool. And but I remember like that S-Rad, it's like, I remember looking at it and seeing it as such a bizarre looking thing, right? And I thought, that'd be kind of a cool bike to have. Uh, you know, I take the R1, the R1s and the R6s. I thought were just gorgeous when they came out. I mean, look at them, you know, like they're you know, like their styling held up fairly well. Um, they were very forward thinking, but it was just that these were the bikes to beat. You know what I mean? Like they were just really fast and really sought after. Um, but now when I look at these bikes, like these older bikes, right? Some of them have a bit of a cult following. Now, for example, the Honda CB750 has a huge cult following. Now, you can find a Honda CB750 all over the place. There's probably more of those out there than any other motorcycle of its type, right? Now, finding one all together and all original, now you're talking some hard stuff, you know, hard digging. But there's some brilliant 750. It had a huge fan base. So if you can find one all original, and I had an opportunity to buy one for 400 bucks years ago. That same bike now would probably fetch me about 4,000 bucks in just in the condition it was in because it was all original. I was going to buy it off my cousin. It needed a few things like tires and chain sprockets, that kind of stuff. But other than that, it was all there, you know. And now it's kind of like, okay, well, those bikes are starting to go up in value. They're never going to collect. I don't think they're ever going to go up ridiculous, but I do believe they're going to go up enough that it, you know, if you can get them now cheap, um, you're probably going to, you know, because they built up a cult following because people bought them. For example, the Yamaha XS 650s. People buy them and they freaking chop them up and, you know, make choppers out of them, calf racers and all that. And there's a big craze of that going on, which is going to again increase the value of the bikes that are all original. But people bought XS 650s because that was the bike that was the first real competitor to the parallel twin that Triumph had. It was basically a Triumph that didn't break down and got good mileage and started all the time. And I had two of them. You know, in the past I had two, or did I have one or two? No, sorry, I had one of them. I had two Yamahas, but I had one of them. But the thing is that those, like, you know, like XS 650 Maxims were Midnight Maxims were, you know, they were kind of they were a cruiser bike, but they were kind of Harley-ish, and they were pretty for a Japanese bike. You know what I mean? So it was kind of like, okay, that was going to be what you would buy before you bought your dream Harley or something like that, right? It wasn't for the sport bike guys because it was a cruiser, right? But the guys that wanted to get into the sport bikes, what did they buy? The RZ 350, the RD 350s, which those I've both tried. And of course, if you wanted to get into something really insane, which I have tried, is the Kawasaki 750 triple, which, you know, those things are made out of gold. Now they're unobtainium. You could still find some of the 500 KZ 500s around, but again, six, seven, $8,000 for these bikes if they're even running. You know what I mean? The basket cases go for five. So again, you can see how you can invest in these bikes. Now let's talk about the 916 again, just because it's a good example bike. It's still highly sought after. Now, is it a really good bike? I don't think it would be a very great bike to own from a rider point of view, because there's so much better out there. I mean, the frame flexes, but that said, when you see the weldings on the frame, it's just poetry. The brilliant red paint. There was canary yellow versions of them, and the odd blue one, and then of course when you get to the 998, you've got the Matrix British Racing Green one, which I think is really nice. I've never seen one in person, but there's a handful of them out there. Uh, the 996 and 998 are basically the final evolution of the 916, basically. But the 916s are still sought after. So a couple of years ago, around 2014, just after my mom passed away, I was getting my driver's license and my motorcycle license. And I think I finished it up. I think I finished the car license in 2015. In 2016, I started the motorcycle license. In 2017, I had it, and I was on the road with my bike. But I kind of went reverse of what I did when I was younger, where most guys in their 20s want the sport bikes and most guys in their 40s want the cruiser bikes, right? Well, I did it reverse. Which is probably the smarter way. That's probably why I'm alive today, because when I was younger, I understood the power of these bikes, and I was always surprised that they were even just legally allowed on the road. I was glad they were allowed on the road, but I'm just like, do they even have any clue how fast these fucking machines go? Sorry for the language, but you get the idea. Like, these things are ridiculous. I remember trying a Suzuki Katana 1100 and winding that thing out a bit, and that was a sport tourer, and I mean, that thing was just nuts. And then of course, like I say, that S-Rad, that was probably the fastest thing I had ever tried at that time. And then of course there was a crazy machine that came out called the Hayabusa. And the whole Speed Wars thing, I want to do a video just on the Speed Wars. I don't know if I've done it yet. I think I did, but I want to do another one on the Speed Wars. Just I don't have any footage, of the bikes and stuff like that. Just pictures that I can get. But the thing about the Speed Wars is the Hayabusa was the fastest factory machine for the road that you could probably buy. I think even including supercars. This was a 194 mile per hour motorcycle out of the box. Those are really sought after. Now, you can get a Hayabusa for actually not bad money, about $4 or $5 You can find yourself, a functioning one that, still rideable and probably needs a little bit of work, I can imagine, here and there. Probably been dropped a few times, whatever. But the 1998/99 Hayabusas are almost impossible to find. Nobody in their right mind would ever sell one, because they're going up in value, right? That's a 1300cc rocket ship. And the reason why, I'm sure there's bikes now that could beat it with the modern technology, but the problem is the bikes now are governed up to 300 kilometers an hour. So the claim, the Hayabusa still has that claim of the fastest production bike in the world, because it was only in the Gen 2 models, or after like 2001, when they were restricted to 300 kilometers an hour, because the Speed Wars was just getting too out of hand. And these bikes, I'm sure the Kawasaki H2 can beat it ungoverned, sure, no problem. But again, the Kawasaki H2 is governed up to 300 kilometers an hour. So you can't chip it and then say it's a factory bike, right? Factory bike means this is how it comes off the showroom floor. And that's why it still has the claim of the fastest bike. So it might not necessarily be the fastest bike ungoverned, but from a factory point of view, this is what you could buy in 1999. And technically there's a 1998, they started rolling out very late 1998. So if you can get a Suzuki Hayabusa that says that you can track back to 1998, that's technically like the first year. So technically they were a 99 in title, but if they were made in 98, it was just they started the production a little bit earlier, right? So if you could get one in late 98 and still have it, what's it worth? Again, these bikes are going up in value. But after the first year, like the first years are usually the ones that are going to, you're better to have the model of bike, whatever generation it is, than not to have it at all. But if you can get a first year of a bike, like a 1994 mint condition Ducati 916 is probably going to be worth more than a 95 of the same year. They'll be close, but every year goes by, the 94 in mint condition is going to gain more value because it's a first year, or you get the last year, which I think was in 96 or 97. Then they went to the 996 or whatever. Don't quote me on the year, but it's something like that anyway. So yeah, you look around for these bikes now and they're really hard to find. Really hard to find. Like, you'll find them, but like at what premium, right? And so if you're buying them from the idea of, okay, well, long-term investment, it might be something that you're going to have to hang on to them too long to be able to flip them, right? But if you can get, let's say, a basket case and you fix it up for like $6-7 then you turn around and you sell it for $23,000, you'd say no one's going to buy a 916 for $23,000. Well, there was a 916 that was up for $23,000. I don't know what it sold for, but it's no longer for sale. So, you know, maybe the guy got 19,000 for it. Doesn't matter. What did he pay for it? Probably 10 or 11. You know what I mean? So he probably made money on that. So depending on what it is, you know, like flipping your way to the top, I don't know. Like for example, if I were to take modern bikes, uh, and you want it all original, and you're okay, you're going to pay a little more, and it'll take longer to get the value out of them. But an HP4, you know, a BMW HP4 would be worth a lot of money, right? Now, of course, if you wanted like you know like ridiculous bikes, yeah, Bruff Superior, you know, first year 48 pan all original, first year 36 knucklehead all original. Yeah, those bikes are going to be worth you know unobtainium money, right? Uh, but if you know were a guy like me, well, you could probably find a Ducati 748 or 916 in a basket case and have it rebuilt. And then when you rebuild it, then flog it. I was talking to a guy at the last motorcycle show I went, was the Northern Old Bastards 13th annual meeting, and they had it in the neighboring town. And the guy showed up on a 1979 or 81 Norton 850 Commando. He wanted about $25,000 for that bike. Now, would he get that? Probably not. The guy had about 20 grand into it. And it was down, like this was an investor class motorcycle. This is something he probably shouldn't have been riding around on. You know what I mean? But you know, he said he rode it around a bit, and I still see it from time to time up for sale, and he's come down a lot. But it's kind of like at that price, I'd hang on to it. You know what I mean? Like, because in another 10 years, that bike will be 50 grand. You know what I mean? Like, you might not get that money for it now, but all original, and in 10 years, 50 grand, easy. Because at that point, it's going to be sought after. You know what I mean? Nortons in general are bikes that are, you can get them about 7,500 bucks, 6,000 to 7,500 bucks, depending on the model. You know, 60s and 70s bikes. Usually, they've always been rebuilt. The big problem, and it's the same thing with the Triumphs. You can usually find some that are like say 95% complete, close, you know, but almost all of them have been rebuilt. There's very few bikes out there that are 100% period correct. But if you could find one like that, even if it's rough, it's worth it to restore it. Well, depends. You know, like I'd always have it in like it appraised, because sometimes it's best just to leave it the way it is. Like if you find like for example, we found an old 47 James 125cc bike, and I mean this thing was like rusted out and everything like that, but because it was all original, it was actually worth more unrestored than what it would be to restore it, right? And that kind of stuff. We were shipping bikes to Japan because back in the 90s, Japan had a CC restriction. So like all these big, crazy Japanese, powerful Japanese four-cylinder motorcycles, a lot of them, I believe, couldn't be ridden there. I think the biggest you could own over there was like a 500cc bike at the time. So they lifted that restriction, and then all of a sudden we were getting orders, and this is kind of like pre-internet, you know, like there were guys that would basically go around to the motorcycles. So there was one Polish guy, he used to go everywhere, and all he did was, I remember he kept trying to buy my bike off me. He goes, I'll give you 7 grand for that bike. I'll give you 8 grand for that bike. He goes, I could sell it for 50 grand over there in Saudi Arabia in like 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Like he was that kind of guy. You know, you want T72? I get you a T72. You know, you just give me 10 grand, I get you T72. Like this guy could get you anything. He was basically, he was like, he was an anything dealer. He was an anything dealer, but he was basically one of these export guys. And anyway, what he would do is we used to get this thing called Auto Trader, Bike Trader, whatever. It's all online now. But every Friday there would be a new magazine come out, and it was just basically want ads for, or you know, like basically here's my bike, it's for sale, whatever, you get a little clip. I sold bikes that way quite a few times. Now it's all online, but what they would do is they would send the magazine there, and their guy over there would say, yeah, I got a buyer for this bike, this bike, this bike, this bike. Go look at it, pay the guy cash, get it out of there. get it sent over to us. And this guy used to come into our store and look at what we had, and we sold. What was it we sold? I think it was the KZ 750 triple. I think we sold it for $7,000 to Japan, and it was $3,500 for the shipping at the time. $3,500. It is 1990s money, right? And yeah, and we sold a bunch of bikes to Japan, uh, and stuff like that. But like, had we hung on to that bike, and this bike comes to mind because what happened was an old lady. Her husband had died, and he had a motorcycle in the basement. She had no idea what it was, didn't know if it worked or whatever. And we went down there, and it was a mint condition, 1976, I want to say 76, 77 Kawasaki triple. It was the brown with the gold tank, really, or purplish. Sorry, the purplish and goldish stripe on it. And we're like, my boss is like, this thing is like just mint, like it even had original stickers on it and stuff like that. Very low mileage. He goes, probably doesn't work at all. So we put the some mixed gas in it. Did it, check the plugs, clean them up. 3 kicks away it went. Oh yeah, like the guy, my boss was at the time. He was doing like cartwheels. He was so happy. It's like. Like I said, we only had the bike for maybe about a week, and we sold it. We crated it up. I remember crating it up, and we're like, I can't believe we're selling a Japanese motorcycle to Japan, But there we were, right? And again, whoever bought that bike, I mean, they got they got a time capsule. You know what I mean? Like, what would it be worth now? Like, this was unrebuilt. It had never been rebuilt, and we basically got that bike for $250 or something like that. Like, again, you look at them now. Like, I would like to have one just for fun. You take it out, you ride it like twice a year, kind of thing. Kill all the mosquitoes and then come back. Nobody will drive close behind you because they won't be able to see from all the the blue exhaust coming out. 2 strokes. Yeah, but that was a crazy bike. The engine was much faster than what the frame and front end could handle. I'll tell you that. It was a unicycle most of the time. If you've ever had the pleasure to ride one of those scary contraptions, bad brakes, horrible suspension, and an inadequate frame, and an overpowered engine, what more could you want, right? The Kawasaki 750 triple, great bike. But yeah, so I'm looking at bikes now. A lot different than I used to, like custom bikes, and I never understood guys that didn't like the custom bikes at first. Now I can appreciate it. So when I got back into the sport bikes, or got back into the motorcycling a couple of years ago, even though my bike's been down for like past 2 or 3, I'll get back in. I'm going to try to get back into it this summer if I can. The world's getting to be a difficult place right now, so it'll get there when it gets there, but I can't wait to ride again. And when I bought my bike, I bought that Triumph TT600 just because it was kind of unique in the sense that it was a Triumph, which are a pretty popular brand now. I can't say that, but like the TT600 is not something you see too often, right? But I bought it because of the cool flame job on the side, and the price was right. It was like 30. It started out at $3,600, and I walked away. I think I got it for $2,900 plus tax. I think I walked out of there at $3,400 or whatever, $3,300, $3,400, and stuff like that. And I bought the bike, and that little bike moves. It's a great bike in a lot of ways. But I bought it, and as a first sport bike, and it was a sport bike that like it was really comfortable, something that I could really live with for a sport bike. Because sport bikes are typically not comfortable, but I could ride that thing for about an hour and a half before I stiffen up on it. So the only other bike that I think would be as comfortable would be either the ZX9 or something like that. Like, it was the most upright you could get for a sport bike, right? But in hindsight, I probably, if I would have went with that bike, I would have probably been better off to go with that bike in all original, just for value-wise. So even when it was broken, it would be all there, and then you just, keep it all like original. Like, pretty much everything on the bike is original, but the fairings. The fairings are original, but the paint job's not, obviously. So I start looking at like bikes that, okay, like fixer-uppers and stuff like that. The problem is you get these fixer-uppers. It's how much money you want to put in them, right? And what does it need? So if you get a bike that's all there, let's say you find an old Kawasaki Eliminator 1100 or a 1984 VMAX, but it's like, okay, it has this problem, it needs this, and needs that, but it's all there and it's all original. Just owning the bike itself might be an investment. You know what I mean? If you can get it cheap enough, right? So depending on what it needs, because like a first year VMAX, again, a very sought after bike. Uh, I had the pleasure of riding one of those. Like at the time, those were real powerhouse bikes. Those were the Harley killers. Those were the, you know, the torque machine, right? They were only 1200cc. People made them out to be much bigger than what they were. Like, you know, like it's just they were a very high-strung, torquey bike. Very fast, light to light. Top speed was impressive, but not like sport bike impressive. You know what I mean? But they are. They do feel you do feel your arms getting pulled off when you take off on those. The front end will come up. And I remember the first time I rode the VMAX, I was very impressed with the torque. You know, but the Kawasaki Vulcan 1500 had much more torque. It wasn't as peppy. You know what I mean? Like it just didn't accelerate the same. But again, if you can find a first year VMAX, yeah, they're kind of a bit of a fugly looking bike, but they're kind of cool too, right? They're mean. They have a very mean stance to them. Again, too much engine, yeah, overkill on the engine, inadequate frame, and very lousy suspension, and you know, sketchy brakes. What more could you want, right? Great bike, and it didn't corner with a dam, you know, because it was, you know, it's a cruiser. It wasn't a sport bike, right? But in a straight line, yeah, you can get those VMAXs humming pretty good. But again, if you can find one cheap enough, I mean, a mint condition like 1984, 86, whenever the VMAXs came out, those things they're pretty high priced, like, you know, $4, 5, $6,000. And I mean, I don't even think they were $6,000. You know what I mean? So give it another decade or two when those things are completely, again, every time, you know, like these bikes end up smashed up pretty quick because they were, you know, a VMAX was a blacklisted bike, even though it fit the cruiser category. It did make it as a blacklisted bike because enough people were killing themselves on it, because I don't even know if the bike was that fast, but it had the build-up and mystique of being this really powerful bike, so people would ride them like maniacs. And then you'd get a guy that didn't have a lot of experience riding, would take it and they'd ring the throttle on it and would ground loop the bike, right? So, you know, quite a bit of them got destroyed, like the R1s. You know, they were, you know, going off the road and crashing into all kinds of shit, left, right, and center, to the point where, you know, people were either dying on them or whatever. So they got this reputation as a you know, widowmakers. But it was also, you know, it was the manly machine to have. So if you can find yourself an old Kawasaki Eliminator 1100 or like a Yamaha VMAX or whatever older one, yeah, those things were cool. They had very cool technology. They were very innovative, especially the VMAXs with the moving carburetor things, where they, you know, they went from a long throttle, a body carb, and then it would change. I think this was on the later variants, but then it would turn into a short barreled carb throttle body, or not carb, but throttle body, and so you would get like a lot of power on the bottom, and then you would get this, you know, insane mid range, right, and then a good top end. A really cool bike, you know. So next to the like I say, Rough Superior, or like a Vincent Black Shadow or Black Rapide or something like that, other old bikes that are still kind of obtainium, but they're really skyrocketing in value. I had a 1972 R60 BMW. Again, in hindsight, I regret selling it, because a 72 R60 BMW /5 model like I had, you know, with the speedo and the tachometer and the headlight. You know, built into the headlight there. That was really cool. Those things, I bought mine for $1,900, and I mean, I rode the piss out of that thing. And I sold it for like $1,100. It was pretty beat up when I sold it. But you can find one in mint condition for like 10 grand now. You know, if you get an old BMW R90, some of the old R90s, especially that gold one, those things are like $15,000. They weren't even that expensive new. You know what I mean? So an old R69, I mean, they're $8,000, $9,000. So those bikes are going up in value like you wouldn't believe, right? Um, but I still think you're in on the early adoption of some of these bikes. Like I say, I would look at different bikes and see what was really popular for the time and see what's out there, right? Because sometimes people don't know what they have and they'll sell like again, you buy a mint condition Ducati 748 for $5,000 or $6,000. Okay, you might have to wait a decade before it's gone up, but in 20 years the thing is going to be you're going to retire with it. You know what I mean? So that's my take on it. Now, mind you, you can look at collector bikes from investment motorcycle, professional, like investment motorcycles, kind of like the way the car guys do. You go and you look at the showroom, and they got everything in there, and everything's like way overpriced to the point of ridiculous. You can even see this with guitars right now. Like some of the guitars right now from the 80s and 90s are fetching so much money if they're still functional, right? So there's like this crazy kind of trade thing going on in these genres. It's a way for people to make money without how would I say it? It's like it's a way to make money, but like in a quick flip, right? So you get something, and I think like somebody's going to do this with like even like a Honda CBR one day, and they're going to go out, they're going to buy one for like $500, right? They're going to fix it up, and then they're going to just really somehow, whether they use YouTube or whatever, to really sell it of how great this bike is, and they're going to build an iconic kind of symbolization around it, and then people are going to start looking for these bikes, right? And then all of a sudden the value on them is going to go up because everybody's going to be looking for one of these bikes. And again, every year a few more of them get crashed off and destroyed. Like parts bikes are always easy to find, right? The functioning ones are a little bit harder. So the point I'm making is that like try to get an idea of what people want now, right? And then take and watch the value of these bikes. Like for example, the Ducati 848s. They're coming down in price quite a bit, but it seems like these bikes are not going to drop that much, because it seems like anything built after 2008, 2007, 2008, 2009 seems to be holding their value very well because they're built better. Like that. They're just like, these aren't bikes that are completely done. People paid more for them in the beginning, so they didn't just trash the crap out of them. Like in the 90s, like I say, you had $8,000, you went in and bought yourself a Yamaha R1, and you beat the shit out of it because it was only $8,000. You know what I mean? Like maybe the first guy didn't, but the second guy definitely would, because he would have got that bike for $5,000 or $4,000 or whatever, and the third guy would have got it for $1,500. You know what I mean? So yeah, the guy who got it for $1,500, let's put the boots to this thing, right? So that's kind of what happens with a lot of these bikes. But now, like, okay, you go, let's say back in 2009 or so, you went out and you bought a brand new Ducati 1199. I think it was the model at the time, or the 848. Those bikes were 20 grand. You know what I mean? They were 20 grand. So they never got a chance to get beat up. So even 10 years later, they're still holding their value, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000. But they may go skyrocket later on. For example, a bike I would keep my eye on for sure is a Ducati 1199 2011, 2012 model when they came out. Because if those things say they drop down to say 15 grand, at 15 grand, I bet you could buy that in 20 years. That bike will be worth over 100,000, just because of what they are. By that time, the 916 will be worth probably $250,000. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like if you had one in mint condition. So I'm not saying they will be. Maybe they'll be worth like next to nothing because nobody will want them. But I can't see that. You know what I mean? Let's put it to you this way: in 50 years from now, somebody's going to look at a picture of a Yamaha R1 from 1998 and say, I wonder what it was like to ride one of them things. Or a picture of a Ducati 960 from 1994, and they'll say, I wonder what it was like to ride one of them. Even if they have rocket ships and space bikes and you know, hover bikes and all that, even if they have all that stuff, someone's going to want to try one of those things to test their skills, to see if they could stay on a Ducati 916 on a rough road, windy road somewhere without getting bucked off. Someone's going to want to do that. Why? Because it's the same reason why people want a 32 Packard. It's the same why people want a 53 Corvette or a 65 Corvette or whatever. It's the same reason why people still buy look for a 64.5 Mustang today. What was it like? You know what I mean? That's why they want it. You know, a 69 Charger in blaze orange with an 01 on the side. People want it because what was it like to be a Duke boy, right? And that's, if I had to pick some bikes that I think to keep an eye on, obviously the Kawasaki H1 would be, or H2 would be, and the H2 race would be bikes if you could get them. They're still way too expensive right now, but maybe they'll drop down to the $20,000 mark in the next. I don't think those bikes will ever go down to $400 or $500. I'll just put it to that way. They're just too good, right? But a BMW S1000, pick a year, any year, but particularly the HP4s and the HP4 race carbons. Those bikes, I think, are going to be worth a gazillion dollars in the future. Anything Ducati, pretty much is a like a Ducati GT 1000 calf racer model there. Those things are gorgeous, and they're actually, I think, worth more now than what they were new. You know, like they're like $18,000-$20,000. They were like 2007. The calf racer, they're just, you know, going to be bikes that are going to be worth a lot. Any of the Triumph Daytonas, the 675s, I do believe the TT600s are going to come up in price at some point, just because they're going to, you know, again, you know, every year a few of them get crashed or whatever. You know, they turn into parts bikes, what have you. So that stuff's going to go away, right? And as it goes away, then people want it. Because I look at the 955i's, they're like $6-8 grand now. They're almost at the same price they were new. Maybe not quite, but they're getting there. They're almost at the same price they were on the showroom floor. So that, you know, just keep an eye on those. Triumph, I'd say any sort of Triumph Thruxton, any of the Thruxton models, I think is going to be, you know, I think they're gonna drop first, and then they're gonna start coming up. You know what I mean, like long term. But the Daytonas, the 675s, I think they're going to be really sought after in about a decade, just because they're not making them anymore, unless they, you know, like the 67 or the 765, maybe they'll put that thing back into production again. I don't know what Triumph's going to do, because, you know, who knows, right? But once something like that disappears, that's the time to jump on them, right? But maybe not right away. Watch them go down in price a bit, and then, you know, see if you get one just before, you know, they're no longer all original, because that's what's happening. A lot of the 70s and 80s bikes is they're all being cannibalized into calf racers and stuff like that, which, again, if you can find one original, buy the original. You know, buy what's all original, even if it's a rougher condition. If it's all there and it's all original, you know, it's a better investment long term. But just look at the values of the bikes now, and just, you know, like, it's not one of those things where you can really track it year to year. You got to kind of look at it decade to decade from when they're made. Like every 10 years, is the value went up, and how did it do in that 10 years? And I think it's one of those things, you do a lot of research, you'll, you know, pick a couple of bikes and just monitor them and go from that. But anyway, I could talk forever on this, so I found it to be an interesting video. So anyway, if you like this kind of content, all the links are down below to help support the channel. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourself, be true to others, always do the right thing. Have yourselves a great day, eh?